Anyway, without further ado, we're going to move on to our next section. And I think this is the no dumb questions.
Yeah.
So what do you got? What do you got for us tonight?
All right. Here's my question. Because to be honest, I don't know a lot about if the Bible talks about dating advice.
Ooh, dating advice.
Because throughout, I mean, there's like, you have the, I can't remember who it was that had like 1,000 concubines, or
Solomon.
or Solomon, yeah. And then, it's, I don't know. I don't know, like, really, if it, there's kind of like more of, it seems like more of a business transaction in certain things, or kind of an arranged situation. But I was going through, I'm still going through Genesis, and this is something I've thought, actually, before I read this. I've really thought about this a lot. But Abraham sends his servant to find a wife for his son.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you have any really insight into that, because the way I interpret it, at least the way that I think of it, is that sending a servant who maybe isn't going to be treated as well as like someone who's of maybe more a higher respect or ranking in life, kind of, that servant really can see people for exactly who they really are, or who they're going to treat, how they're going to treat someone at the bottom.
Sure.
I don't know if, with what you've read or what you've studied, to me, I feel like that's kind of a really good rule of relationships, is to look for how does that person treat the lowest level of person that they interact with. Because everybody will treat someone with a lot of respect who they feel like they need to suck up to, or they need to get by with. But when it comes down, I feel like that's something I've observed in my life a lot, is the person who, is, or like a friend of mine who would start dating a girl who, he's head over heels for it, but then I can see her making fun of people, like of making fun of somebody who's, maybe like poor or something. And it's like, man, they just don't seem like a good person to me.
Yeah.
And then kind of lo and behold, I feel like I was always sort of right. Like at the end of that, girl would, kind of eventually start treating them really poorly. And I'm like, well, I could see they treated other people poorly. Like that's how they have been, they just weren't doing that to you because they liked you at the time.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I didn't know if, I don't know if there's other parts of the Bible that I just have not gotten to or haven't heard that really give like dating advice. But is that something you would say is kind of like makes sense, or am I putting a lot of thought into something?
Well, I'll say this.
Probably is a bit of a stretch.
I'll say this. I've never thought of it that way, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means I've never thought of it that way. So it might be something that even I need to go back and do a little bit more study on. I've never like researched the Bible in terms of dating advice. So, I hate to admit it, but I don't know if I just know a lot about this topic. I know how they handled things in the ancient world. And I know part of the reason that, we will run into issues. So if we go throughout scripture and look at it like a lens for dating advice, and honestly, we're probably going to find ourselves in a little bit of trouble, because the Bible just is not, in terms of dating, it's just a different world.
Right.
They don't look at love the same way you and I look at love, or the way that most Americans and Europeans look at love. It's not looking at that connectedness in the same way. Paul talks about marriage quite a bit. There is a very heightened importance on the fact that your spouse should be a believer, to the point that, if you go to 1 Corinthians 7, like, you're kind of almost given permission to leave the marriage if they are not a believer, to a certain degree. But I mean, again, you got to be able to be careful with that too, because like, he's not actually giving you permission to leave as much as he's saying, hey, you need to preach the gospel to them. They need to hear the word. And hey, if they abandon you, that's kind of abandonment. Like, let them go, because they're just not going to act as Christians. And so a lot of weight is put on that. And I would say honestly, like if there was any advice that we could give you, that would be it. Like, honestly, if I was talking to a group of younger people about dating, I'd say, the first question out of your mouth needs to be, where do you go to church? And then if you feel like you really like them and they say, no, we don't go to church anywhere, say, well, you go with me. And if they still say no, honestly, I would just, dust off your sandals, so to speak, and walk on. And I know that seems harsh, but the reality is that if you get into a relationship where you're a believer and the other person is not, it is just waiting for heartache to happen. It is just waiting for heartache to happen. Think about, like, how are you going to raise your kids, and how are they going to feel about, you taking the kids to church? Are they going to like it? Are they really anti-church? How is it going to impact you? They're not going to. They're going to want to go out and do stuff all night Saturday night. They're not going to want to wake up in the morning to go to church on Sunday morning. They don't believe, so I mean, realize it's going to impact every aspect of your life. Your holiday traditions. It's going to impact, what you do with your family, what you don't do with your family. It's going to impact everything. So that is one of those things that's just utterly important. Now, I'm not going to condemn somebody who decides to get married to somebody who's not a Christian, but I will just say that the Bible is pretty clear. Like, that's might want to think twice before that, because you're going to end up in a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
It's not the most awful thing in the world, but it is a lot of heartache. It's asking for a lot of heartache. So that's one of it, but kind of like what you thought, like, so you're bringing up like King Solomon and King David, and it's like, yeah, those were, yes, those were wives and concubines, but those were also land deals and transactions. They were kings, and as kings, they were right in the middle of the trade center. They had all the major trade routes that led from Egypt to basically Europe and China, and thus Europe and China down to Egypt. So they made a lot of deals with a lot of people, and marriage was a great way to create a covenant or create a contract with them, to maintain peace. So yeah, a lot of those were probably closer akin to contracts like that. But even so, yeah, they were still wives. I mean, they were for sure. But but in terms of dating advice, it doesn't. You're right. It was just viewed completely different. Again, this idea and concept of love isn't going to develop for some time.
Right.
At least not the way we understand it as Westerners. So,
yeah, I wondered that, because I mean, maybe it was just the fact of you just send a servant to do a job.
Yeah.
And that was all. Maybe that's all it was. I think, again, I think I've thought about this a lot in the last like 5 years, because when I did a maternity leave at the high school in Pekin, and there was this girl who was a student there who she was not afraid to talk about everything going on in her personal life out loud. And she would go on about how you just can't trust men because they're always fake, and they'll this guy, he acted all nice, and then all of a sudden he just acted like a real jerk. And all I could think of is like, did you ever see him interact with the nerdy kid in class?
Yeah.
Like, did you ever see, does he treat people with respect? Does he talk to the teacher with respect? Because I mean, she said a student, apparently she was dating, and he was in one of the classes, and he was nothing but rude all the time to to me, to everybody. And I thought, I mean, you're sitting there thinking it's funny that he's being rude, but then you're surprised that he's not nice to you later. It's like you see him every day being rude and off-putting, but when you're not the butt of the joke, it's funny.
Yeah.
And so I think about that a lot. Like, I don't think it's really that hard to find a good person when you actually look at who they talk or how they interact with other people besides you.
Yeah.
Well, so
and again, there's a, from a psychological standpoint, there's a lot of research that have been done on this in terms of, how guys hold themselves, how they present themselves, and what girls look at and find as attractive. Versus now, and as girls get older, they will see other things as attractive, but like in high school, they only have a tendency to look towards certain aspects, and one of those aspects is what is it? Confidence, you know,
Yeah.
a person that seems overwhelmingly confident, will come off, really good compared to somebody who lacks confidence. Now, again, there's a lot of stuff that can be said on that. And to be honest, I'm not near educated enough to speak with it with any type of clarity other than the
Right.
few things that I've read in my books. But I know there's a lot that goes into it, especially at the high school level.
Yeah.
And then as they get older, it changes and adjusts and tweaks. So
Well,
yeah, it's
I
interesting.
wonder about it.
Well, and again, the thing that you brought up is something that I've just never thought of, and so I'd have to go back and I don't know, maybe it's worth a little bit of research and study
Yeah.
from my own side.
I had a friend in high school who stopped talking to me because he wanted to date this girl, and she had dated a bunch of people, and they all ended the same way. It was like she would date him for a while, and then she would start being really cold and like basically wouldn't even like talk to him or respond to him, and that would go on for like months.
Yeah.
And then whenever she finally found a new boyfriend, she would dump him. And then the next day she was with somebody else. And my friend, I told him, like, this is what she's done like 3 or 4 times. Like, I'm just worried for you. And he just, I was just such a horrible person. I was so awful. Casey, you're such a jerk. Like, you think you're better than everybody, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then about 4 months later, he was at a party that I was at, and he was like, "You're exactly right. It all happened exactly like you said." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not a fortune teller. I just saw her do it like 3 times to other people."
Yeah.
Like,
right.
it's not that hard,
This wasn't that challenging.
So. Yeah, but we never really became friends again. But it was like he did admit that.
That's good,
I called it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So I've always just kind of thought about that, and honestly, like usually and I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but I've actually had a conversation with a youth minister before when I was in high school about relationship stuff, and he basically just said, "Oh, I'm just glad I'm married. I don't want to deal with that stuff. I don't know what to tell you, honestly." And I always just think there's got to be something that can kind of like, some sort of book guideline.
Well, and to be honest with you, though, there's some problems with, so there are some books out there, but they're just riddled with issues. So even before your time, so whenever I was in college, the big book that everybody was reading, and I mean everybody,
I think I know what you're going to say.
Goodbye.
Yes.
By Josh Harrison. And I even bought the book. I have it on my bookshelf somewhere. And he talks about how it's biblical to court and yada, yada, yada. And, to be very blunt about it, Josh Harrison is now divorced and not a Christian.
Yeah.
And, he supposedly had all this great wisdom, and he really didn't. And, he was kind of attacked even at the time for saying, hey, maybe get some years on you first before you start writing a book. And a lot of people my age were like, well, he just knows something, and it's like, well,
right.
Here we are, 16, 20 years later. And like, guess what? I think all the critics were right, unfortunately.
Right.
No, there's nothing wrong with courting per se. If that's the procedure you want to take. And to be fair, I think there can be a lot of good that comes from that. Again, you can use biblical principles and kind of establish some things that are really good, ways to maybe avoid temptation or avoid, venturing off, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, again, you gotta kind of set that up, if you're in a good Christian home, your Christian parents will probably set that up for you, whether you like it or not. And if you go to a Christian college, they'll probably have some rules too. And all of those are there ultimately for your benefit. But at the end of the day, what they're just trying to stop you from maybe doing something that would be, non-biblical or non-healthy, for you in your relationship. And again, this is one of those things where the Bible has a lot of wisdom in this, Like there's a lot of psychology, there's a lot of studies that are being done even now that are kind of going, yeah, the Bible has a few good points here.
Yeah.
And again, one of the ones like we talk about is like a lot of couples, will get together, they'll go on a few dates, and then all of a sudden they're like instantly like moving in together, cohabitating. And yet cohabitating couples have like this massive chance of failure. I mean, it's just, the percentage of them that make it to marriage is slim. And then once you get married, the amount that end up getting divorced is just astronomical. You're looking at 60-70%. It's just so high. And psychologists have tried to figure it out, and they got different theories and stuff like that. But, at the end of the day, it's like, these are just good principles, and the Bible's not specific like that. Like, don't go looking for the verse that says, don't cohabitate with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Like, the Bible doesn't have that, but it does talk about how, avoiding temptation. It does talk about making sure you're presenting yourself as, somebody who is holy and pure. And again, once you have a live-in partner, like, it's hard to do those things. So,
Well, I got one more quote. I know we got to kind of move on here soon, but I got one thing that I heard someone say. And of course, you hear a lot of things online, and who knows how much of this is based in biblical, or if they're just kind of making something up that sounds good.
Yeah.
But I heard someone talk about, they said, about the whole waiting before marriage, or waiting till marriage to have, I don't know. Are we allowed to say the word? Anyway,
this is our podcast. We could do it.
This is our podcast. To have relations.
Yeah. Okay.
Physical relations till you're married. And the person said that someone made a comment like, well, that's just dumb. If you're committed, you should be able to do it whenever you want, whenever you're ready. And he said, he responded with, do you think waiting till marriage is for the other person? He's like, no, that waiting till marriage is for you to prove that you can be faithful. Is like, if you can't even stop yourself from all your urges before you're married, how are you going to resist them when you're married and you're, some person outside of your marriage is tempting you? And I don't know if that has any biblical context. It sounds really good. It sounds really nice,
Yeah,
but
it sounds really nice. I the way I look at it is, I kind of look at it like this. And that is to say, until there is a lifelong commitment, you should do nothing that takes a lifelong commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Coming together and having relations is something that's designed by God to create children, little babies, and they're blessings, and they're wonderful, wonderful things. If you're not ready for that, then you shouldn't be doing that. And if you're ready to have little babies with your partner, then why wouldn't you commit your life to them? Why wouldn't you? And you can, I guess you could think of a couple different things, but honestly, almost all of it will boil down to, you want to make sure you have a route of escape. And therefore, you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
If you're looking and thinking, boy, I need this just in case I need to escape, that's not fair. That's not fair to that little baby, that little child that could come out of that. You need to have a lifelong commitment. And this is one of those things where it's degraded a lot in our culture. And honestly, there's parts of it that's the man's fault, and there's parts of it that's the woman's fault. And unfortunately, we're seeing both of it. Promiscuity is obviously increased, but you think about this, like, on the one hand, I could talk about the honor of women. Like women used to force a man to, in essence, say that he committed his life to that girl before they did the thing, and, women in that regard were very bold and audacious, and they were like, no, you're going to commit your life to me before this happens. But even in that regard, like, a lot of times the men were expected to have, machismo and so the boys were like kind of let off the hook. And it's like, well, that's not really right either. Like, men need to be men. And one of the things that men should be really good at is making a decision, standing their ground, and come hell or high water, they're going to protect their family. And you can't do that if you're still a playboy. You can't be, you can't be a man if you're a playboy. You just can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so as far as I'm concerned, like these guys that are out there being players and yada, 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 they can think of themselves what they will, but they're not men. They're just not. So, and I mean, that's not to say that you can be a man and not, be married, but you can't be a playboy and be a man. You just can't be.
Yeah. That's great.
So,
well, we gotta get on to the next section. Sorry.
We're just getting things are